Welcome to SmithWeekly discussions, an occasional program for our members of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position along with your favorite beverage to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine our show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion today, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience of Smith Weekly, including Ken S., at Gold Silver Dig, Sean M., and Andy S. On the program today, we've got a returning guest back to update. Mr. Jason Bontempo is with us on the podcast. Jason is the Chief Executive Officer of Gladiator Metals, a Yukon Canada-focused copper and gold explorer and project developer, advancing the Whitehorse Copper Gold Project, which has multiple exploration areas, including the company's cornerstone, Cowley Park, with recent discoveries off a historic mineral resource and past copper production areas. Within the project area, other prospects includes Chief's Trend, Best Chance, Arctic Chief, and Cub Trend, among others. Gladiator Metals is listed on the Toronto Venture Exchange under the symbol GLAD, as well as on the US OTC markets under the symbol GDTRF. Jason, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Andrew. It's good to be back. Lots to talk about on the update.
Yeah, Jason, absolutely. Good to have you back on the program. I want to say it was back in July that we had the introduction program with Gladiator. You guys were moving along then with lots of stuff on the go. Of course, since you guys have done a lot more work and definitely lots to catch up on here with exploration happening at Cowley Park, among other things. But good to have you back on the program. Why don't we kick it off here with an update on the ongoing phase 2 drilling work at Cowley Park. Start with that first. Of course, that's within the Whitehorse Copper Project area. Cover for us the recent results announced over the past few months, maybe starting with the most recent, Jason, if you would, and then also what you see as far as results yet to come down the pipe, assay results, as well as next plans on the exploration front.
Well, back in July, Andrew, I'm sure if some of your listeners had have taken the plunge and bought a few shares, they'd be happily very well in the money at this stage.
Yes.
Of course, the whole market's had a little bit of a sell-off, which I think we're no orphan to all of that. But certainly since July, it's been extremely productive. And in fact, there's probably four key areas that I can talk about in terms of achievements and results. One of the first really exciting components of the program at Cowley Park was back in August. We released some results. We started to drill deeper than 200 meters. So Cowley is our most advanced prospect. It sits at the most southern end of the belt. It was always going to be the next cab off the rank, if you like, when the belt was in its mining phase back in the 70s and late 70s, but never got there. And so this is where we've been focused, and drilling has been fairly shallow, and we've been drilling a lot of the skarn mineralization at surface, which is obviously quite high grade and ubiquitous, which makes it for a great opportunity to be a future resource at Cowley. But drilling, well, in fact, it was a vertical depth of below 150 meters, which is obviously still quite shallow. And we started to intersect mineralization in the intrusion related component. And it was very exciting. Our geologists, our president, Marcus Harden, and our VP of exploration, Kel Nielsen, were getting very excited because they were hitting bornite and chalcopyrite in this intrusion related mineralization. And the reason why that's so exciting is because it's starting to show porphyritic signatures, leading us to think that there's most definitely the opportunity for a porphyry that lies beneath the skarn mineralization. And that was a very exciting step forward. And although it leads us to more targets, it is something that we've been working on since, and really it's a 6 to 12 month program to work on the broader mineralization of a potential porphyry. Also, more recently, we put out some news around some of the geophysics results that we've been getting. We've been doing a lot of gravity and a lot of induced polarization for chargeability. So gravity tends to show the density, weight, and the more dense an area is, the more likely for us it's going to be skarn mineralization. It's been highly positively correlated. Every time we've drilled something with a higher gravity area, it's been skarn mineralization. And in a recent news release, you'll see that we highlighted two particular very exciting targets. One up at the Chiefs Trend, which is Doozy, the other at Cowley Park. And in particular at Cowley, we're very excited about one that's notably called Great Southern, which is just obviously south of Cowley, not by far. And it's very exciting. The gravity component of the signature, as well as the chargeability, the IP, is both very high. If your readers go onto our news release, they will see how it makes for a very, very exciting target. And in fact, we are looking to get onto both the Great Southern target and the Doozy target up in the Chiefs Trend in the next, well, as soon as we get a bit of snowpack, which should have probably been around now up at Whitehorse, but I'm sure it's coming soon. So hopefully we're drilling that towards the end of the month. We've also put some news out on drilling at Cowley, some of the drilling we've been completing at Cowley Park, and in particular, when you look at the Cowley deposit area, it splits between a northern limb and a southern limb. The southern limb was only ever looking a bit spottier than the northern limb because it just didn't have as much drilling. So we have been focused on that southern limb. We have been receiving some very, very good results on the southern. That's giving us a lot of confidence that not only is the southern limb starting to hang together a lot more in terms of tonnage, but it's also coming to surface. And in addition, we are starting to intersect a lot more gold as we move east of the Cowley Park deposit. Back on the 29th of October, we put a release out showing a particular intercept that was 14 meters at almost 2.4% copper and almost 2.8 grams per ton gold. And in addition to that, 1,500 parts per million of moly, which is quite high, 0.15%. So it's a very, very, very good intercept. And it was only from 33 meters, which is bringing it to surface. So a lot of follow-up drilling to be done on that southern limb. And I think as we're moving out to the eastern part of Cowley, it's, what we're seeing is increasingly we're very happy with, and there will be a number of drill results coming over the next, through November on Cowley Park drilling out to the east. There's another two very important milestones. One was that in September, we completed a financing of 22.5 million Canadian dollars. $15 million was charity flow through, and 7.5 million was hard financing. And we were extremely well supported by our existing institutional and high net worth investor base. And I think as a junior, we boast a very good shareholder register, which included follow-up investments from 1832 Dynamic out of Toronto, Mackenzie out of Toronto, Macquarie Bank Mining and Metals out of Australia, Arimco out of Australia, Ixius out of Europe, and a number of our very sophisticated high net worth investors out of Vancouver and Toronto. So very well supported in the raise. And after this small sell-off, your listeners actually can take a position in Gladiator at even a slightly cheaper price than what we were financed at. But what's so important about that is all of next year, all of 2026 is fully funded. And so that puts us in an extremely strong position. And that leads us into another important milestone, which is the process to achieve what we call a Class 3 drilling permit. This is an upgrade from the Class 1 drilling permits that we've been operating under and successfully operating under over the last 2.5 years. The difference with the Class 3 is that the Class 3 allows us to put in more access with roads and trails to areas that allow us to do more high density drilling, more drill pads per mining claim. And that's important for us, particularly at Cowley, to be able to move Cowley to resource definition. And so back in October, we received a positive recommendation from the YESAB, independent YESAB, the Yukon environmental body, for the government to move forward to issue a Class 3. And so now that is now going back to the Mineral Resources Department through their process. And, we'd like to think that that Class 3 would be issued early next year, which puts us in good place for a good full year of drilling, not only at Cowley, but at many other places along the belt where we need to create access that we couldn't under Class 1. So it certainly opens up a number of drill targets that we can't wait to get into. But more importantly, it now sits with Minerals Department, and that also leads into another very important event in this half of the year, which is the Yukon territorial election occurred on Monday. And there has been a change of government there to the Conservative Yukon Party, who received a very, very strong mandate, winning, I think, close to 14 or 15 ridings out of 21. So that's led by the new Premier, Curry Dixon, and the Yukon Party. We, are very, very focused on facilitating the private sector in the territory to start improving a lot of investment into Yukon, and particularly into developing their resources, as they see it as their primary major private sector. So that's a really huge positive, not just for Gladiator, but for the industry in Yukon. And look, they're very responsible. They will be focusing on modernising the mining legislation, which is really critical to the development of future mines in the Yukon. So congratulations to the Yukon Party, and something that your listeners should really take note of, because there are some amazing mineral deposits in the Yukon, and they don't have one operating mine. So very much a territory to keep an eye on, and looking forward for our own development at Cowley. Look, in summary, it's been a very successful 6 months. Just short of 6 months since July. Been a number of milestones. We're fully financed. The share price is obviously a lot higher than it was when we first started in talking to you in July, but very attractive pricing with this recent sell-off. And so that really leads us into next year, 2026, and what to expect. And this is where I think your listeners should really be having a good hard look at Gladiator Metals, because, as I say, we're fully funded. We're expecting our Class 3 permit to be issued early next year, and that's going to unleash a lot of drilling in two components. One will be at Cowley for a resource definition. And what you'll see at our recent release on the 29th of October, we have a very important figure in that release, and you'll see there's a Class 3 priority drilling area. This is actually an extension to the eastern part of the deposit, where we are interpreting a very high grade core. And we haven't been able to get into this area because of the access we need to create, and it requires a Class 3. But we're very much looking forward to drilling into this area, and what we're expecting is to drill. What we're hoping for is a continuation of a very high grade core at Cowley. What we're aiming for is to deliver a resource. We're focusing on targeting our maiden resource for the project, and in particular, initially at Cowley. And by delivering an initial maiden resource, it's a very important milestone for the capital markets and investors to be able to start seeing through some value as to where we're going, what we can potentially be. I will say that Cowley is open along strike. It's now open very much at depth. Depth below 150 meters is going to be really interesting next year, because of we're going to be vectoring and looking for the potential porphyry mineralization. But in terms of the fact that we've also got this very high grade skarnet surface that stand alone, at this point in time, we can most definitely see 40 to 50 million tons of mineralization from surface. It's really going to come down to its grade. Is it going to be 1% copper? Is it going to be 1.5% copper? Is it going to be 1.5% equivalent? That we can't put a handle on until we do our definition drilling. But the company standalone, just at Cowley and just on that surface skarn mineralization as a company making project, let alone anything else that we discover and find along the way next year, which obviously we expect to do so. And in particular, like for example, in the next 3 weeks, we're going to be drilling some of these very, very intense and attractive geophysical targets, which are going to be very interesting, particularly Great Southern. What I'll point your listeners to is that when we look at where we're trading at, when we look at the stage of the project, yes, we're in that sort of $85 to $100 million market cap range, but we're fully funded for all of next year. And if you look at some of the market comparisons, and when I say market comparisons, I will make it clear that these companies are, ahead of us. They're more advanced at their stage. They're either they have their resource announced, they're in a study phase, or they're even in construction phase. So, for example, Foran Mining, very sort of, they reported 40 million tons, 2% copper equivalent. They're in construction. Their market cap is over 1.5 billion. You have Meridian Mining, very, 55 million tons at 0.4 copper, but also with gold. They're at the resource stage, starting studies. They're at I think it's close to 500-600 million market cap, listed in Canada. You have Marimaca Copper. I think it's 200 million tons at 0.45, but with a very high grade core of 40 million tons at just over 1%. I think they're moving in feasibility, capped at 1.5 billion. Arizona Sonoran, different project. It's heap leach, it's broader scale. But again, in that study phase, market cap of around 600 million. So, for your listeners, next year, Gladiator is fully funded, moving towards a pretty significant potential maiden resource at Cowley, and it could be a lot bigger. Obviously, we're targeting, we target the belt to be well over 100 million tons, just on the skarn mineralization at surface, let alone potential porphyry discoveries along the way. And I think that's the sort of potential upside that next year can bring. And that's the sort of positioning if there's a very strong view from your listeners that copper is on its way and going to be continue, or will 2026 be for copper like 2025 was for gold? So that's what I'd be telling listeners to keep a very close eye on our progress and what we're doing. And look, leading into the end of the year, we'll be closing down the drill rigs around the first week of December. There'll be drill results coming out at Cowley for the most part, and then there will be a lot of drill results coming early next year, probably end of January into early Feb. So lots of news. It'll be a constant news flow with Gladiator. Yeah, I didn't give you a chance to ask a question.
Well, Jason, I think that wraps it up for this update, and that's a good monologue. I think we'll leave it with that.
Yep. Okay.
I'm kidding with you, but definitely lots of stuff happening. Maybe we stick with the project there. So yes, there is that rectangular zone there that would be class 3, and congratulations on advancing that. Just for clarification there, when would you expect that potentially to come through?
Given the class 3, the well-trodden well-trodden process, we're sort of expecting it in February.
Okay, I suspect some of those folks will be things will slow down. It tends to slow down definitely during December and the first half of January at the minimum.
Typically, Andrew, will close down the last week of December, and we really don't get going again until the end of January. So that's typically what we've done the last almost 3 years now, 2 years now. Yeah.
And maybe a bit of a late snowfall maybe coming in there, so you guys can wrap up and clean up before the snow flies too hard. Some of the government folks, I suspect, with the transition as well as different breaks and holidays, etc. Hopefully the timing will work out well there for you guys to receive that as you guys get ready to start back up. And then congratulations with the outcome there with the new folks coming in for the provincial government. That's great. Great to see, and interested to see what else happens on that front as far as their increasing positive attitude towards exploration and also development in the Yukon. So that's great to hear as well. Why don't we go back to, you covered off some of the existing key shareholders as well as some of the new ones that came in with that financing. That financing was also upsized. Congratulations on that. I know you guys are certainly fully funded based on today's budget and how you expect that to come through. Obviously, subject to success. If you guys do have success and you need to increase and kind of accelerate, I suppose, the work on certain areas that maybe it makes sense to top up in 2026. But remind the audience as well, just on any budget comments there, plus the post-capital raise, the current shares outstanding.
The current shares outstanding just short of 100 million. I think it's about 98 million shares on issue.
Thank you for that. Just wanted to get the audience an update as far as where you guys stand on the finance side of things and capital structure. What about to the west there? Looking at this at Cowley Park, any interest? I know that there's the priority zone there that needs the class 3. It's open to the east, 2 different zones, I suppose. And then to the west, is there any interest to go out and do any maverick work on the west side, or do you see that that's not a priority?
The west has been fairly well drilled. In fact, that's where a lot of the historic drilling had occurred, and so that we've got a pretty good understanding of it. We're chasing it east because we're just seeing the higher grades, Andrew. But I think Cowley needs to be looked at in the sense now that it's not just the east; it's now most definitely at depth as well with this recent intrusion-related mineralization. Even further south with these, it's going to be. I have to say, we're all. You normally don't get too excited. Well, you're always happy to see a geophysical target, but with the targets that we've highlighted at Cowley, when you look at that news release, and you'll see the very high gravity and chargeability of the pink at Cowley South and the Great Southern target, because we've got so much experience in drilling gravity and we've been intersecting skarn. There's probably we shouldn't be, but there's probably a high degree of confidence in terms of that it will be mineralization, but what grade will it be? And then what gets everyone excited is the chargeability. Some of the chargeability on that Great Southern, the numbers are ranging very, very high. Up at as high as that, like 38s, which is, we think that mid 20s is quite high on chargeability. So chargeability means, for your listeners, if when you send a charge into the ground, how long is it staying in the ground before it dissipates again? And the longer it stays, well, is that more potential metal holding that charge? I mean, that's it in a basic description. So for us, we've got Cowley to the east and west, but we haven't focused as much on the west because that's where we've got a number of drill holes. We're now seeing the southern limb come up. We're seeing even the intrusion related result is actually sitting right. I hate to use the word, right in the crutch of those pants legs. So that's even pulling mineralization up, or creating for a much more attractive open pit if there's mineralization at depth, and it's right in the middle of that plug between the northern and southern limbs. And obviously open at depth. And then there's Cowley, and it's sort of on strike if you're looking at it from a north-south perspective. So what I love about Cowley is that we can already see an underpin of value, even though we haven't officially reported a resource. We can see the tonnage at surface. We've got a high degree of confidence from the drilling we've done to date. It's just about getting it to 43-101 standard. And then it's just, how much bigger could it be? I mean, look, if we really are extending it at depth and along strike, and even, along these big gravity and IP targets, maybe we won't do it any justice by putting a resource out next year, because it's potentially, could it be a lot bigger? So it is a work in progress, but based on what we see already, we think that when you look at some of the comparisons, that just with companies with 40 to 50 million tons at 1.5 to 2% copper or copper equivalent, the value uplift on what we know already is significant if we can advance it, let alone these expansions at Cowley.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely interested to see what happens down here with Great Southern and then also Cowley South as well, Jason. So that'll be interesting to see when you guys are able to go tap those and do some testing. That'll be interesting to see what comes about on those. With respect to the maiden resource estimate back at Cowley Park, yeah, I think it does make sense as you guys continue to have good results that it gets shelved potentially to 2027 as you guys continue to work on growing that. There's no real reason to get ahead of yourself on putting that out right away. Folks can do some internal modeling and work to kind of sort out where it lies based on the information you have been providing. With the potential for a maiden resource estimate to come in late 2026 or sometime in 2027, again, speculative here. When would you guys start to look a little bit harder at some of the testing work with relation to metallurgy on the project and some of that test work there?
We have already completed some preliminary metallurgical test work. At Cowley, we had 5 holes selected by our independent 43101 competent person. That work and those results will be coming out shortly. And it's just it's preliminary, but there's just some more work till we finalize and put a more defined result out to the market. But we're, needless to say, we're very pleased and happy with what we're seeing. Even if you date back to the operation in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a small surface strip at Cowley that got taken to the mill when Hudbay were operating, was successfully processed. But that news is coming. We're in train. We're going to bring it to you.
Good to get that stuff going early, which you guys have. And of course, there's some historic data there to work from as well. Okay, moving north. Any comments on some of the prospects to the north, Arctic Chief, Best Chance, anything up there that you guys would want to try to attack in 2026, or is it all hands on deck in the south?
No, we've been very active up in the Chiefs Trend, particularly the Chiefs Trend. We're saving the Arctic Chief. So on Arctic Chief, the most priority targeted Arctic Chief is the Best Chance area. For Best Chance, we're going to need that Class 3 license, but there's 3 holes into Best Chance already that look really attractive, big broad zones of near surface high grade copper mineralization. And if listeners go back to our most recent news release at Best Chance, what they'll see is the simulation of the size of Cowley next to Best Chance. You know, Cowley has over 300 holes in it, and Best Chance has 3. So that is an area that we'll focus on in 2026 once the Class 3 comes through. In the last 6 months, we've most definitely been looking at working on the Chiefs Trend, which includes the old Little Chief mine. It includes historic Middle Chief, Big Chief, and the big 2-kilometer long Valerie Trend. And that's because when we completed the gravity there earlier in the year, we had a number of significant gravity highs. And so one really important news release that listeners should go to is when we intersected, again, intrusion-related copper mineralization at the Valerie Trend. So that very much threw our geologists into a spin of excitement. So not only did we have an intrusion-related result down at Cowley, we now got one up at the Chiefs. The Valerie Trend and the Chiefs Trend actually is quite interesting because when you look at a cross section across it, it's quite broad, and there's a number of types of mineralization. So what we see there is a potential for a broad-based area of a combination of resources that will amalgamate, and that's going to take a bit more work. We've been doing a lot of drilling there, very, very broad space drilling that's mostly focused on understanding the geology and the mineralization styles. But we continuously are hitting copper mineralization, and it's more about now zeroing in and focusing on how we, where we're finding a concentration of that mineralization across the area. I mean, look, the Valerie Trend is over 2 kilometers long. There's a lot of work to do there next year. The gravity consistently hits skarn. And then, of course, there's this porphyry potential that lies beneath. And that's what's really interesting, everyone. And we'll be working on that throughout the year.
Jason, that sounds good. Appreciate that. Definitely looking forward to seeing whatever you guys are able to uncover and expand up to the north there as well. The depth testing is going to be interesting too as you guys continue to allocate capital towards that as well.
Well, Andrew, if there is a porphyry deposit, it's the sort of porphyry deposit where we expect it to be in that sort of 100 million ton range at, is it 0.8, is it 0.9, 0.6 to 0.8, it would be, shallow and extremely economic at that range. And that's what makes it really interesting is that if we've got the skarn at surface, well, that's the sort of payload to get you into the porphyry. That's what makes it, if the skarn alone made it a great project, I mean, the skarn plus a potential porphyry discovery that is not very deep, we're talking 150, 200 meters. It's really very shallow. It makes it an exceptional project. So it's going to be a really interesting 2026.
It definitely would be a game changer. Well, Jason, why don't we shift gears here as we wrap up? Just wanted to get your thoughts on the market for a moment. Current copper price, of course, impacted recently by the broader market concerns out there, which are a lot on the list now, at least two hands. How are you looking at the copper market as it stands now? And then also, how are you seeing copper demand shifting, Jason, including new supply sources from North America in the future, including places like the Yukon?
I'm seeing the current situation. I think anyone that's very close to the resources market and the junior resources market has most certainly been feeling that the market got very, very toppy and hot and hadn't seen anything like it for a number of years. So I think everyone sort of moving, I think the market moving into a sell off or a profit taking situation leading into Christmas to pay for all the Christmas presents. It to me seems absolutely as expected, normal. A number of these companies are still above, still very much above what investors have paid for them. I mean, there's been a significant amount of financings as well, so it really needed a breather, in my view, Andrew. And I think that's healthy, actually. And I think now investors can become a lot more discerning as they move into the new year. And look, my view is that this is a great time through November and December to really pick off what you think you'd like to have a position in 2026 and buy it in a cooled off market. Actually, it's a really great opportunity. I think for copper moving forward, it's never been a question of the fact that the demand for the metal in the long term, the view and the perspective on that has not changed. When you focus on the energy transition policies of just about every country in the world, when you look at the energy transmission infrastructure that's required, when you look at the renewable infrastructure that requires copper, I think as a long-term play, in addition to its usual consumption for construction and general use, to me, it's going to be a long-term positive on the copper price and for demand. I mean, declining grades, you've probably read of a number of issues at larger mines, whether it be shutdowns due to operational issues or accidents or political issues. They've never been more evident than they have in the last 6 months, if not the last 12 months. And it's interesting how North American governments are looking to actually invest in their own projects to get them going. You'll see the Canadian market's done that recently, Foran being an example of one of them. And I most definitely see Gladiator with its Whitehorse copper project as a future candidate because of its location, for its advantages. It's like advantage, its infrastructure advantage of where it's located. The draw and labour resource. It's a positive economic effect for First Nations in the area, but also the fact it is going to be a more greener or environmentally friendly development. I mean, it is a high grade near surface, so smaller tonnage but higher grade, less carbon footprint because of our location, less roads to build and workers to travel. The mine workers can hop in their car and they're 20, 30 minutes away from home. versus flying in, flying out, setting up camps, building roads. So it'll be a very attractive project in my mind. So I certainly see that the supply of copper that's coming probably is, from North American developments, is just needing to feed into what will be a growing demand over the next 15 to 20 years.
Always good to get your take on the market and see how you're looking at it. The Yukon has heated up substantially from almost no interest years ago. Very good improvement on that front, and also for potential future supply coming from the Yukon as a producing jurisdiction. The depletion issue is a major concern that still really hasn't gotten due respect from the market, and I think that'll come at some point in the future. Can't say when. Obviously, we know it's dependent also about some of these more broader economic geopolitical issues out there that can cause temporary shifts in the price. But depletion is a huge issue, and just not enough replacement mines getting permitted of good grades coming on anytime soon. So I think that's also a key factor as well. Aside from the energy stuff, aside from no matter what side you're on with respect to the decarbonization narrative or no decarbonization or more CO2 is good or less CO2 is good argument. But definitely good stuff here. I'm very pro copper over here in terms of price moving forward ahead here in positive fashion for, obviously our sector as well. So
You're referring to the macro component and the global demand. I mean, you can imagine mid-tier to large tier copper companies looking around, wondering where it's coming from. Like, what are they looking at as well? So there's
yeah,
the corporate activity that'll be really interesting also.
then the shift of infrastructure, copper infrastructure, the finishing, smelting, all that stuff, the shifting
Mm.
of supply and infrastructure for copper back to North America, back to portions of the West, because it's been given up so much over the decades in the past. So that'll be interesting too, because we're seeing that shift. Still a lot of hot air, but we're starting to see the money come now. We're starting to see the checks be written, more serious nature of that happening, even though we've been talking since we've been blue in the face over here about that and other commodities as well. Interesting points here on that front, but definitely better days to come here, short of some of the bumpiness and turbulence that we're going to get into as we move down the road here. Why don't we wrap it up for this update? I'll just leave you with this last one as we wrap up. For potential investors who are listening in, Gladiator Metals has a market capitalization of about 86 million Canadian dollars. Why should the company be considered within the institutional, family office, and retail investors portfolio at this stage?
Look, as I was pointing out before, when we look at the stage that we're at this we're in our pre-resource stage. We can see ourselves delivering at least a minimum tonnage of in the range of what some of these other Canadian listed copper companies that are more advanced than us, and they're close to 4 to 5 times greater in value. So when you look at Gladiator, we're aiming to be at a similar stage at the end of next year as some of our grown up peers, and we're fully funded to get there. It's a wonderful opportunity to take a position in a company that I believe doesn't have that much downside, because I feel that we're quite substantiated with what we know at Cowley, but there is a significant reveal and an uplift on value as we achieve pretty straightforward milestones with the current funding that we have.
Keep up that effort. Jason, what is the best way for interested parties to contact the company?
The best ways are to come in through the info email. I get them all the time. So if you come in through them, we'll always respond.
Jason, well, thank you for that. And thank you for the update on Gladiator. Keep up the efforts on further discovery at Cowley Park and elsewhere. We look forward to having you back again to update in the coming months.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. It was a pleasure to be on.